Hello, this is Richie Venton, the Scottish Socialist Party National Trade Union Organiser. Just under a week ago, a bedraggled billionaire, Rishi Sunak, announced the general election for the 4th of July. Now, why on earth did he do so? I think, first of all, because he could see that things could only get worse, that their vicious attempts to outflank the Reform UK party with their racist stance was in danger of unravelling when the better weather of the summer would allow more of the so-called small boats to come across the channel. Also, the prospects for the economy were not going to be exactly glorious for the mass of the population. Nobody was going to believe the nonsense that they were better off just because they were given a couple of quid on national insurance contributions. And so he's gone to the country in a desperate attempt to save the collective skin of the Tory party. But, according to the bookies, there's a 99% chance that Labour will win the election. And I think the 1% chance for the Tories has probably fallen even further since some of the nonsense that they've come out with, including this idea of national service for teenagers. So, I think most people have the attitude that this is a golden opportunity after 14 years of Tory misrule to boot them out. To boot out a party which is the architect of chaos, of crisis, of climate change, chaos accelerating. To see it as an opportunity to boot out the Tory party, which is dripping with contempt for the working class, which is riddled with racism, which has added to the climate catastrophe, and has absolutely no intention of improving the lot of ordinary people. Now, I think whilst it's the case that the overwhelming majority want the Tories out, what is their attitude towards Labour? On polling day itself, a poll was done where the Tories only won 10% support, Labour got 34%, but the clear winners were those who said neither of the above. 43% said neither Tory nor Labour. In fact, an estimated third of Labour voters either said they didn't want either of them or they don't know. What a condemnation of a Labour opposition, which after 14 years cannot gather enthusiasm amongst the population. Sir Keir Starmer has used one word to constantly bang on about in this election, the word change. But when you listen to his so-called keynote first speech, then the main thing he emphasised repeatedly every 2 or 3 sentences was that it's the Labour Party that has changed, that he's changed the Labour Party, that the changes in the Labour Party are permanent. In other words, he's making sure that the Tory voters are clear that there's no residue of the more socialistic policies that Jeremy Corbyn represented. And I think when you look at the fact that Starmer has welcomed with open arms the right-wing extremist Tory MP Natalie Elphicke and then booted out socialists like Jeremy Corbyn, that probably sums it up. Or when he came to Scotland and launched Labour's election campaign there, it's no accident that was in the business headquarters of Lord Willie Hawkey, whose wealth is estimated at £300 million, where he made his wealth, amongst other places, in Dubai. That's the kind of company that Labour is keeping it. Or today, 120 businessmen have endorsed the Labour Party as the best opportunity for Britain. Or the banker, and I'm not using rhyme and slang, of course, the banker Benny Higgins, who used to be chief executive of the Tesco Bank, involved in paying pitiful wages to his staff, has now come out in favour of Labour. So what we've got is the capitalist class switching over to support for Labour and the working class feeling increasingly disenfranchised, feeling neither of the above. What do? We want the Tories out, but what are the options? And this idea that Labour is going to represent change is a dirty lie. They represent no change, frankly, compared to Tory misrule. There'll be no cap on bankers' bonuses. There'll be no wealth tax on billionaires and millionaires. There'd be no dismantling of Trident weapons of mass extermination. There'd be no reversal of the privatisation of the National Health Service that was particularly carried out by the likes of Tony Blair in the past. Quite the opposite. There'd be more nuclear weapons. There'd be further privatisation of the National Health Service, openly declared by both Starmer and his health spokesperson, Wes Streeting, who has now accused the National Health Service of being corrupt and is eager to involve multinationals like American companies in the run of the health service. And of course, Labour's PFI infamously means that for every £1 borrowed to build a hospital, the taxpayer has to pay back up to £8 to the moneylenders. That's the case, for instance, with the likes of Wishaw General Hospital. And Labour has also said they'll keep the notorious, cruel two-child benefit cap with the rape clause that's involved in that, robbing food from 80,000 children in Scotland alone. They will keep the Tory bedroom tax, which chops the housing benefits and universal credit of 100,000 Scots. They'll retain the vast majority of the anti-trade union laws, and they've also now begun to renege on previous half promises of abolishing zero contracts. They've begun to reintroduce the weasel word of exploitative zero contracts, that they'll end exploitative zero contracts. A dirty get-out clause, considering the fact that all zero contracts are exploitative, and should be abolished entirely. But when we see the prospect of a Labour government, despite all that, because of the hatred of the Tories, what are the prospects? And I think a fundamental point is that compared to the days of Tony Blair, number one, there's less enthusiasm and less illusions amongst the population. But number two, there's a different economic context. Blair enjoyed the advantage of a temporary capitalist boom at the time he was elected in 1997. In contrast, recent reports estimate that the national debt that Starmer will inherit is £2.3 trillion. And what are they going to do about that? Well, they face a situation where, because of that public sector debt, local authorities face bankruptcy. There's notoriously more potholes in Britain than there are craters on the moon. There's more food banks in Britain than there's branches of McDonald's, which is an indication of the crisis of the capitalist system that Labour is intent on upholding and retaining. So what are they going to do about it? Labour's economic spokesperson, Rachel Reeves, has made it very plain and simple. She was asked the other day, will you carry out tax increases to fill the hole in national finances? Or will there be public service cuts? She said there would be no tax increases. In other words, she doesn't want to scare away the rich. There'll be no wealth tax, in other words, for example, no progressive tax on income or increase on profit taxation, corporation tax on profits. But instead, she made it clear that there could well be cuts to the public sector jobs and services. And that's precisely what will happen under a Labour. So I think that what we face is the prospect of a Labour government that will rapidly lose any kind of support amongst the wider population. It's not so much that they'll have a honeymoon period. It'll be a rapid movement towards divorce proceedings between the working class and a Labour government of Sir Keir Starmer. And therefore, what do Socialists face in this general election? Well, the Scottish Socialist Party, we cannot afford to stand in every seat to offer a socialist alternative, because frankly, the Westminster system in particular is rigged. Money buys campaigns, money buys votes. It's a big money-dominated election procedure, a completely corrupted version of democracy. We cannot afford to stand in all the seats, but we do intend to offer about 150,000 voters a socialist alternative in Rutherglen constituency and in Glasgow East, standing Bill Bonner in Rutherglen and Liam McLaughlin in Glasgow East. And we do that on the basis that people need to have the chance to reject all shades of Toryism, because all the major parties are offering variations on Toryism, variations on capitalism, variations on a neoliberal agenda, frankly, of no attack on the rich and plenty of attacks on the working class and even the middle class in society, a reliance on big business, on the market system, and not on state intervention in order to organise the wealth of society for the benefit of the population. And I think the task of socialists, and this is what the SSP is attempting to do on a modest scale, is to forewarn what will happen under a Labour government and to offer a clean, principled socialist alternative. Because we will first of all say we cannot trust careerists and corrupt politicians to further the interests of ordinary people. When you've got MPs that are living on 91,346 a year, and that's before any expenses, it puts them on a different planet compared to the rest of the population, which is why it's a matter of principle for the SSP that any MP should live only on the average wage of a Scottish worker. And that's what our candidates are pledged to do, to remain in touch with the conditions of working class people. But we also need to put forward a raft of socialist policies that will advance the interests of ordinary people. We're basically saying reject all colours of Toryism and vote for socialist change, genuine change to transform the lives of ordinary people. Without going through every single policy, we're arguing for concrete measures that would transfer wealth and power away from the rich to the rest of us, such as a £15 an hour national minimum wage at the age of 16, without exception, with equal pay for women, something that Labour has quite consciously refused to implement. We're demanding things like public ownership of energy so as to cut the bills for households and to rapidly transition to green energy production in a worker-led transition to green energy production. We're arguing for insulation free of charge of every household in order to cut bills, cut emissions, cut the attack on the climate. We're arguing for public ownership of transport so as to make it free at the point of use for people of all ages, a measure which in one fell swoop would tackle both poverty and pollution. And we're arguing for public ownership of the construction industry to assist the process of building 100,000 council houses for affordable rent, with rent controls and rent cuts for every sector of society, so as to tackle the housing emergency which we're all very aware of in Scotland. The essence being we want socialist change instead of the various shades of Toryism. I think the population in Scotland face a horrible set of choices where major parties are just offering variations on a tune, where they're offering that there'll be no fundamental change. We'll continue to have a society where 1.3 million Scots literally cannot afford to live, according to recent statistics from the government. We want a change to that, and the Scottish Socialist Party, whilst unable to challenge in every seat, will be calling upon people in Glasgow East and Rutherglen at least to take advantage when offered socialist MPs that would live on a worker's wage and advance the struggle for socialist change. It's an election which unfortunately will not in broad terms lead to change. It might be a different colour of rosette to those who enter number 10 Downing Street, but what we will face in the future is the challenge of rising up against that Labour government because of the attacks that they carry out against the population. And I would say also that in the case of Scotland, it will actually open up the prospects of a renewed struggle for Scottish independence, and in particular for socialist version of independence, an independent socialist Scotland, because Labour will disappoint and the people will start to look for alternatives. And I think that's where fighting for socialism now in the election will strengthen the struggle for an independent socialist Scotland in the future after they experience the disappointment of a future Labour government.